head of Group Card and Emerging Payments at Standard Bank. And his role is really spread across 17 African countries. His academic qualifications include an LLB as well as an MBA. And his expertise is in a number of areas: leadership, people management, customer service, sales management, and business performance. But I believe his passion is really leadership. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Lincoln to talk to you and share his views with you.
Hi, Prof. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hello.
Lincoln.
Hi, Prof. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're loud and clear, Lincoln. Go ahead.
Can you hear me, Prof?
I can hear you, Lincoln.
Hello, Prof. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Lincoln. Go ahead.
Prof, can you hear me?
Go ahead, Lincoln.
Martyn, yes. Or should I start? Because I
Yes,
can't
you
hear
can
you,
start.
so I could just start.
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, I lost you there for a bit. So I'm just going to make a couple of comments on the issues that Prof wanted me to deal with. My name is Lincoln Mali from the Standard Bank Group. I head up the card and emerging payments division of the bank. And so Prof asked me to think about how we look at entrepreneurship across the African continent and draw it also to South Africa, and then talk about the COVID impact and how we're thinking about it for entrepreneurs, and lastly finish off with thinking about financing for entrepreneurs. So I'm going to try and do that in a short space of time so that there's enough time for Martyn and the dialogue that will take place afterwards. So let me start with the continent. I've been blessed to work on our larger continent for the last 19 years. And even today, I'm amazed at how much misunderstanding and underestimation is there about Africa's potential as a growth market. So many players underestimate and misunderstand the potential that sits in our African continent. What also is amazing is also after all these years, many businesses also don't understand, and even governments, the role that business can play in transforming the society and in solving its biggest challenges. So my sense is that many of our entrepreneurs are well placed to solve many of Africa's intractable problems. And if we create an environment for entrepreneurs, they would be able to solve some of these problems. So when I think about what those opportunities are on the continent, I'm just going to list only 5. The first one is a fast-growing and urbanizing population that has got huge potential for consumer-led businesses. Secondly, Africa is industrializing. There are huge opportunities from a manufacturing point of view. Thirdly, we have a huge infrastructure gap versus other continents. So there's a huge opportunity to close that infrastructure gap through infrastructure programs. Fourthly, there is a growth in digital and mobile access. So those who want to be in the telecoms environment and innovation in that space have an opportunity. And last but certainly not least, there is an opportunity to unleash innovation in agriculture and resource wealth. So if you create that picture, you can then start to see how innovators and entrepreneurs can come into that space. Now, in the time I've spent on the continent, meeting thousands of entrepreneurs, the one common thing that they have for me is the imagination to see Africa's unmet needs as an opportunity for business or for entrepreneurship. The one common thread is this imagination they have to see the continent's unmet needs as an opportunity for business. And a lot of these guys see the challenges that we've got on the continent as a spur for innovation. Because we have problems, we have challenges, but through those challenges, there are opportunities that are there. But entrepreneurship is not for the faint-hearted. This is not an easy life because there's a lot of emotional turbulence in being an entrepreneur. Many of them understand that many startups fail, and therefore they sit with this constant fear of failure with them. Also, they have to juggle many roles, and also they have to deal with many setbacks. Some of those setbacks could include losing customers, disputes with some of their partners, increased competition, staffing problems, and regulatory burdens. All you do this whilst you're battling to make sure that you're struggling with payroll. Can you make payroll? Can you meet your obligations to your bank, to your suppliers, and so on? And that's why sometimes in some of the discussions we have with entrepreneurs, we talk about them looking after their overall health, because their mental health and physical health is important for the life and health of the business. So therefore, what we've asked to do is to make sure that we look at entrepreneurs as human beings, holistically, who they are. If I think about some of the amazing entrepreneurs we have on the continent, we have people like Nelly Nkolise from South Africa, Audrey Cheng from Kenya, Kathleen Lukov from South Africa, Odinaye Winnie from Nigeria, June Soia from Kenya, Oluwamika Enela Adlaja from Nigeria, Brenda Katsuwege from Uganda. All of these, from people who manufacture health and medical equipment to those who are working on digital innovation in media, all of these, or those who start piggy banks in Nigeria, they saw an opportunity and they've built that. If you take somebody that is well known to most of us, who I see as the epitome of an African entrepreneur, Aliko Dangote, he's built this massive business across a range of geographies on the continent. When you're looking at him, you see a successful innovator. You see somebody who's deeply conscious of the barriers to his business success. You see somebody who's careful to build long-term resilience into his business model, and somebody who manufactures these commodities in massive volumes. So in a nutshell, what I see in entrepreneurs, I see those people who see massive societal problems or unmet needs, and they find a business model to meet that. So if I just talk about COVID-19, we did a survey recently with our partners, MasterCard, and they gave us some fascinating statistics of the number of clients or businesses whose turnover is down, who are temporarily closed, who are expected to reduce headcount, who have decreased working hours, who've laid out of their staff, who are battling to access finance, and who are battling to access government support. The scariest stat for me was how many of them said they will not last beyond 3 months. If the lockdown carries on in South Africa beyond 3 months. We are at that 3 months period. And if there is no opening, many of these may not come back again. So what we've been working on as banks or as a bank is to give a lot of advice to entrepreneurs, especially how to deal with their finances, giving them a sense of the need to focus on their cost structure. How do you make sure that your cost structure matches the revenue potential that's there, which is now obviously less and less than what you had before? How do they think about their capex? What were their capex plans before? Should they carry on with some of the capex, or should they reschedule the capex? How do they work diligently to optimize their working capital in the most minutest detail of working capital? How do they forecast their cash flow? How do they look at the revenue performance of the business? And last but not least, how do they look at capital in their business? And we've asked them to spend a lot of time stress testing liquidity and where their funding lines will come from. So let me conclude by talking about some of the things relating to finance. We as banks are working through our own innovation and our own change. Gone are the days where we would do just traditional banking when it comes to SMEs. So we're trying to identify those areas where we can do more support of entrepreneurs at less risk to the bank and less risk to the entrepreneurs. If I could mention some of those, if I take the area of franchising, you have already well-established franchisors who are looking at the right franchisees to partner with them to do good business. So we have got a very strong franchising arm that works in making sure these new franchisees are up and running and they're successful. The area of procurement, large businesses, both for strategic reasons, others complying with the law, are procuring services with small businesses. So we're trying to make sure that we finance a lot of those businesses that procure those services through large businesses. Digital is a big focus for us to help our entrepreneurs that are clients to digitize. We're launching, for example, e-commerce platforms that are there for entrepreneurs who don't have to go and build a e-commerce platform. We create a platform for them and they plug in into that. We're also changing the business model where we work, where we're trying to create business bankers sitting in one room who can directly interact with an entrepreneur from the comfort of their business, who don't have to come to a business. And we call that BizDirect. We're also looking at different funding models for entrepreneurs, working with fintechs to say, could we not finance some of your revenue streams? Could we not finance some of your proceeds upfront so that we deal with some of the challenges that you can have in times of ebbs and flows of business? And last but certainly not least, we have a number of COVID-related relief packages, forms of assistance for different businesses, and we reach out to our clients and other clients to work with us through those. So that's been a very fast way of trying to give you a sense of the three topics that Prof asked me to deal with. I'm sure we'll have more time to engage in the Q&A.
Thank you, Lincoln. We're just not seeing you at the moment. You can just turn on your video,
Prof,
please.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you very much. Yes, there'll certainly be some questions for you, but let me get to our other panelist, and that is Dr. Martyn Davies. Dr. Martyn Davies is the Managing Director of Emerging Markets and Africa at Deloitte. He's also the Dean of the Deloitte Alchemy School of Management. And in his position, he leads what is called Deloitte Insights, the Leadership Division, Knowledge Management, and is also a member of the Deloitte Global Economics team. His qualifications include a PhD, as well as a law qualification. And he was previously ranked as the #1 analyst in South Africa by the Financial Mail in terms of African economies and markets. So Martyn, we're looking forward to hearing your views. Martyn?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much. I'll just try and start my video here.
Thank you.
There we go. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Osman. Thank you. And just to build on what Lincoln said, thank you for the opportunity. And good morning, everybody. You know, there's a few points that Lincoln raised that I'd like to amplify. So, I was an entrepreneur. This is a very personal story, and it's almost almost 5 years ago, I sold my business to Deloitte. So now I'm a corporate guy. And I must tell you, it's tough. I see there's over 90 odd callers on, or participants in this call. I'm very curious to know how many of you are actually trying to build businesses or have aspirations toward that. Because as Lincoln so accurately said, and revealed in that report, Standard Bank jointly with MasterCard, there's significant headwinds out there, particularly for young people starting a business. It always has been challenging, increasingly in the SA, not to mention the rest of the region, but now the environment is incredibly, disabling. Just some comments. A friend of mine said a few years ago, and I'll quote her, is that you can't entrepreneur your way out of a failed state. And I'm afraid the challenge is that, I spent a lot of my formative years, and I often talk about it, in Asia. So I lived in South Korea and places like Taiwan and China and Singapore, and I spent many years in the 90s and beyond that in Asia. And what is in Africa we need to recognize is that in Asia, the state is the entrepreneur. In Africa, the state is often the giving, most often, is rather than enabling entrepreneurship, is creating headwinds towards building businesses. And when you have a leadership of a country that is self-serving and self-interested, self-focused, and not enabling a business, ultimately it results in investors or people doing business not having a long-term perspective, but rather a speculative short-term play because of the political instability and uncertainty about the future of the country. Now, this is the antithesis of what we have seen in Asia the last generation, where the enabling environment, supported by typically, in most of those countries I mentioned, a 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8, 9% GDP growth over a course of a generation. Now, I'll be South Africa specific here. We have a country now which in real terms for quite a number of years has been in GDP economic contraction. And when I say real terms, is that if your population growth rate is less, if your GDP growth rate is lower than your population growth rate on a per capita basis, in effect, you're becoming poorer, not so. So there's been constant headwinds towards building businesses. And I think the sense of risk on, Lincoln spoke about use the word emotional issues, turbulence, stress one has to deal with running one's own business. Believe me, it's very, very real. There's a trade-off. I think there's this notion of almost a sexy perception of running one's own business and being entrepreneurial. And that's propagated by many magazines like Fast Company, amongst others. It's great. It has significant rewards. It gives you an enormous sense of achievement and accomplishment having done that. But at the same time, it's deeply stressful as an individual, as a family, and believe me, I know of that. There's a lot of sacrifices to be made in the process. So my conclusion on this is that, just some observations around the region. There's very few countries, states in our part of the world, maybe Rwanda stereotypically being one of the very, very few, but actually creating a long-term enabling environment, tech-driven, tech-adopted, strong educational support for young people moving forward. Most other states in the region, including our own, I'm afraid, are not supportive of small business, and the bureaucracy, the over-regulated nature of the economy for small companies is, I'm afraid, is deeply, deeply challenging. So, where to from here? Lincoln mentioned two words which resonated. One is imagination, and the second one is industrialization. Again, it depends on if you're an entrepreneur in your early 20s, got a good education, you've been to a region business school, whatever it may be, and you want to start a business. It's not easy. From the macro play here is that you have in our continent and World Bank released a report about 6 months or so ago, I remember reading, where Africa needs to create over 3 million jobs, formal jobs every month, merely to keep up with population growth. A month. It ain't doing that. So where are the jobs going to come from? The jobs are going to come ultimately from industry. As we've seen, sort of the China price, the wage inflation, we've seen countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia absorb manufacturing and become effectively new sort of Chinese provinces effectively in terms of manufacturing, high labor absorption, and the like. The only country I see in terms of which is industrializing, creating employment, value add, etc., is Ethiopia. The African industrial story is largely an East Africa story, and focus, I would argue, predominantly Ethiopia. If you haven't been up there, I strongly recommend you go up sometime and go to the special economic zones. There's a large number around the country. But I think many of our countries' governments' sort of strategies as follows, and it's deeply frustrating for me, and all of us observers, is that we never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and that's the deindustrialization story of China. How Africa can create these jobs, create industries, create not just sort of survivalist entrepreneurs, but substantive companies that can compete globally, rather than just merely exist in their domestic environments. And that's something which Asia has succeeded in doing in the last generation or so, and something which many of our countries don't have, or states don't have a significant ambition to create corporate muscle to project economic power. Last point is that it's I was on a call recently talking about South Korea. I mentioned earlier I used to live there for a few years, and you find that companies like Samsung, LG, Daewoo, Kia, 25, 30 years ago, these companies were insignificant. And now they're global leaders, and they've all been driven by entrepreneurs. State-enabled, yeah, but driven by individuals, and more important, not just individuals, but family businesses. And I think that's sort of that should ultimately be the future of Africa, whereby countries are able to create very enabling environments for companies to form, companies to grow, to corporatize, and then go global. That's a generational play, and that's something which very few countries in this part of the world have been able to figure out. But that's just some very, very general sort of macro thoughts. But happy to discuss any of the multiple points raised. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Martyn. Okay, so I think we're having Lincoln is having a little difficulty with his audio, so we'll just wait for him to see if we can sort that out. But perhaps, Martyn, we can go on to some of the questions, just to remind the participants that if you want to pose any questions, you can use the Q&A function or the chat function to put your questions, and then I'll put it through, the panelists will be able to see it on the chat function. But if you use the Q&A, then I'll read it out as well. But Martyn, if we come back to the thing about we've spoken, I think both you and Lincoln have spoken about Africa and as taken a sort of a continental view. But if we do a comparison between, perhaps in terms of things such as enterprise development or entrepreneurial activity between South Africa and countries in the rest of Africa, how do we fare?
Look, just a general comment. So, there's not much support, to be honest, whether you are here, whether you're up north. I think, Lincoln spoke about COVID-19 and the pain being felt by smaller businesses in our country. And this is a consequence of lack of, quote, fiscal headspace, i.e. the government's got no money to support business. What's crucial right now is to protect companies, to protect jobs. And this is a country, South Africa, which is the most resourced and financially well off, relatively speaking, in the entire region. Imagine if you're in Nigeria, Uganda, you're in Kenya. As a small business, I think there's zero expectation that the state or the government is there to support you. And what we've seen and learned in recent weeks is that lockdowns, economic lockdowns are the luxury of advanced economies, because us in the developing world, the global south, I'm afraid, simply can't afford them. So I think what I've been disappointed by is that there's been so many significant initiatives, many by the state, some by private sector, which are more effective, and some supported by private sector, including like the Standard Bank, ourselves at Deloitte, we do this, but to support smaller aspirational business. And I'm afraid a lot of the capital available, the expertise has become, or access to capital has become, what's the phrase I'm looking for, politicized. At the same time, you have people who are not so much seeking to build businesses as they are seeking to become rent seekers from the state. And that, I'm afraid, is not good. So there's been significant amounts of, I think if we had a more effective state, a more agile state, a more accountable state, the resources that we have available for entrepreneurship would be far better allocated and spent ultimately. We have a department in recent years created for small business. What does it actually do? I wish someone could tell me, but for me, it's about removing regulations. The regulatory environment we have in South Africa is more suited towards corporate SA rather than smaller aspirational business. And that is deeply frustrating for those people who are starting to do their business and have to comply with so many regulations. You literally spend half your week not working, making money, being productive. You spend half your week trying to comply and with non-compliance effectively becoming a criminal just by being an entrepreneur. That's not right, and that has to.
Lincoln, I believe you back with us. Is
Yes,
your audio
I am.
okay? Okay,
Yes,
Lincoln,
fine.
perhaps your views on that. The question I posed was the whole thing about how do we compare with the rest of Africa in terms of entrepreneurial activity, because both of you have spoken from a continental point of view. But if we come back to South Africa, how do we compare? And as Martyn, do you have any? Martyn's given some reasons for that. Do you have any views?
I didn't hear what Martyn said, but from my experience, one of the biggest differences is there's very little government support for entrepreneurs in many of our countries on the continent, which means that if you're an entrepreneur on the continent, you don't factor in government support in many ways as part of what you have to do. In fact, many entrepreneurs succeed in spite of the existence of governments on the continent. What's different in South Africa is that there's a facade of support. But if I caught the last part of what Martyn was saying, that facade arises from the fact that there are many rent seekers who are leeches on the system, who then go and take those resources that are meant for entrepreneurs, and then those resources go to hangers on, politically aligned people, and people who add no actual value to business. When those resources are directed at true entrepreneurs who are innovating and coming with products and solutions that solve unmet needs, I think our country would be in a better space. So I think that true entrepreneurs on the continent and here have got one thing in common. They are all trying to make a difference. But I think on the continent, there's less overt government support. Here, there is a attempt, sometimes government good attempts, but I think the system just doesn't allow itself to reach the entrepreneur.
Thank you, Lincoln. Perhaps a link to that then, this whole notion of the general assertion that an extreme event exposes entrepreneurial activity to high levels of uncertainty. How do we build resilience in the system? Martyn?
Sure, this is a key word these days, resilience, and undoubtedly crisis reveals fragility. And
Yes.
we've seen that right now. And unfortunately, we entered 2020 in a very weak spot to begin with. So, this is not a theoretical thing. And as Lincoln was saying earlier, is that the pain suffered by many. The stress, maybe is a better word to use, the stress, financial, emotional, felt in the marketplace currently is indeed very, very problematic. I think, what do? Can you, the phrase that we often hear, can you future-proof your way out of this? How do you become more resilient? Well, I'm afraid it's often a character thing. Companies there's two things that are important for corporates right now. There's cash, i.e. retention of cash, freeing up of cash, and it's people, people's health. Those are the two only important things, cash and people. I think we will see all companies dramatically cutting back in terms of our cost base going forward. We need to be significantly leaner and a lot more, use your word, resilient. But what does it mean? I think getting through crisis, it's, you know, I think already we entered this spot. The only upside here is that, you know, if you're, we've entered this crisis from a pre-existing weak position. A lot of companies have already built significant resilience, considering what's happened in South Africa over the last 10 years, structural decline, effectively. So we're already pretty resilient to begin with, compared to many others. The challenge now is saying, well, how do we come out the other side? Let's call it 2021, and having protected as much industrial base, service base of our economy, at the same time, jobs. And what I want to see, maybe linking to what was said earlier by Lincoln, is that, and this is quite a key point, all of us, every company in this economy is taking pain. All of us have taken haircuts on salary. That's fine. We'll get through this crisis. We need to tighten up and get through this. The only sector that has not taken any pain whatsoever is the state. I would like to see, and I've seen this in Asia over the years, is when come crisis, there's increased flexibility by the state to cut costs in the interests of broader society. So, for example, the last crisis, even in Singapore now, in recent times, we've seen every Singapore government employee, from a post office worker to the prime minister, take a pay cut. I don't see any reason why a public sector should not be taking pain, considering the, as I said, is the relative high cost of the public sector in our economy. And why not take a 10-15% haircut on salary? You know, there needs to be a sense of us through this crisis, and let's utilize it in a almost perverse way to forge a greater sense of, we're in this together. We need to get through this on the other side together, and we are ultimately a nation here. I'm not seeing that. In times of crisis, what I am seeing in many societies, tragically, is greater fragmentation, less alignment. And that talks to leadership, both public, political, as well as private. I think that's something which we should all recognize.
Perhaps, Lincoln, you can come in here. We got a question from one of our participants, and it's linked to really the issue of how do SMEs change? What will be the best way? And this is what one of the participants asked, what will be the best way to rebuild small businesses? And maybe that's linked to change, and how do they change?
Okay, I'm not going to add anything to what Martyn said. I fully agree with him. And I think that people see the sense of us and them. If you're asking people to take pain and you're asking people to sacrifice, but you yourself are not sacrificing, your legitimacy will be at stake. So I think that government needs to do a lot of soul searching about the actions that it needs to take to save businesses, to save industries, and to save a lot of livelihoods. So I'm not going to add more than what Martyn has said. In answering the question about entrepreneurs and how they can
Sorry, Lincoln. Lincoln, we're having some. We're just having some audio problems. Let's just start the last part again in terms of entrepreneurship.
I'm saying in terms of entrepreneurship and helping them to survive and build I want to touch on a couple of points. In the last 3 months, I have spent so much time talking to our clients who are entrepreneurs. And a lot of them, we've had to do a lot of soul searching together to say, what industry are you in? What are the prospects of that industry? What are some of the things that will make that industry to survive? Are you in the right industry? Do you have the wherewithal to survive this downturn? And are you making decisions through the crisis? Because if you're not making decisions through the crisis, you can make a lot of knee-jerk reactions. So we're spending a lot of time with entrepreneurs to get them to get to the nuts and bolts of their business. Forget whatever dreams you had. What is the reality of your business now? Is this business sustainable? What is it going to make it sustainable? What key decisions do you need to make sure that this business survives? Let's talk about a couple of things. Let's talk about digitization. What do you have to digitize in your business so that you make investments in that? Because if next door, somebody else who's a competitor is digitizing with the idea to deal with safety and health, because a lot of people now's mind is on health and safety. If your product or your service doesn't meet that criteria, your business is not going to survive. 2, if your industry is going to open at a much more later stage, what are you doing to keep your business going? 3, what conversations are you having with your suppliers? What conversations are you having with your employees? What conversations are you having with your funders as an entrepreneur? And then are you looking at your business model and to see whether your business model is sustainable? And then last but not least, are you looking after yourself? Are you looking after yourself as an entrepreneur? Because mental health knows no race, it knows no class, it can affect all of us. At heightened levels of stress, we get into problems of health and safety. And then for those businesses, to conclude, who are opening up, we are aggressively talking to them to say, understand what are the health protocols you need to follow to open your business. Because if you don't follow those, you're going to be closed, because you're going to have a client or a staff member or a supplier being infected, which then sets you back. So these are the kinds of conversations we're having with our clients.
Thank you, Lincoln. Perhaps I can just go on then to the issue of the building the ecosystem for entrepreneurs. It's often said that entrepreneurship, entrepreneurship is about the interplay between the entrepreneur, the economy, and institutions such as banks or higher education institutions. The question is, what is the role of those institutions? What role should those institutions be playing, given that perhaps government hasn't always come to the party in that? Martyn, and I'll then ask Lincoln, because there's a specific question to Lincoln about what can the banks do. But let's
Thanks,
start
Osman.
with Martyn.
Thank you. So here's a practical suggestion, comment. I think the most valuable thing, this is arguable, one of the most valuable things you have in life, in your career, is a network. Networks, relationships. That's what it's all about. And South Africa, is already a very socially, economically fragmented type society. So what I suggest is it's all very well to say one's relationships, but start to structure this. So think REGENT Business School. You have your cohort of students currently, MBAs, whatever it may be. You have a sizable alumni group. You could have potentially contact details here or a community of, I don't know, a few thousand people. At times of stress in society like this, at times of economic pain, the most valuable thing is to have a network of common interest, of association, and ultimately ultimately of trust. Trust is the great facilitator, lubricant of commerce. Without it, everything is speculated in short term. So I think for a particular business school where you find in international business schools, the sense of alumni and bond is significantly stronger than what you have in South Africa. It's just it's a weird sort of cultural thing. I'm not just talking about Asia here, talking about the UK, and talking about sort of the US especially. And I notice how these networks of people are incredibly facilitating and enabling of business transactions. Not in no way in a corrupt sort of fashion ever, but in a facilitatory fashion. So if Regent Business School, the people on this call, the 70 odd people, whatever it may be, the broader community, the alumni, how does this business school start to facilitate and build that network from which its members of that network or participants can really, really benefit, particularly in these very challenging times? Because you'll start to, as you start to investigate and explore, you'll find so many common interests between you that can be leveraged for business outcomes and support entrepreneurship. That's my very practical proposal.
Thank you. I don't know if we've lost Lincoln again. Lincoln, are you still with us? Maybe he's trying to come back in. Martyn, linked to that was the question that was asked by Connie, and I see she's put something up as well on the, okay, here we're back with Lincoln. Lincoln, welcome back.
Yes.
Your views on the role of institutions,
So I think,
particular banks like yours?
Yes, I think that we are going through our own change as institutions. So if I take us as a bank, there are a couple of things that we've had to change and work through about being more relevant to assist. The first one is the role of partnerships. There is absolutely no way that banks on their own can be able to solve many of South Africa's intractable problems. But identifying partners that have got a common purpose, as Martyn was saying, is a very important point. Because when you partner with others, you are able to make a lot of inroads to solve some of South Africa or Africa's problems. Because our own existence depends on us having an economy that operates in a society that's equitable, and you've got social stability. The second issue is around partnering with innovators. I think that we have a huge opportunity to have entrepreneurs who are fintechs and other innovators who are in institutions like the university and banks to work on some innovations that could help us solve some of these problems. If I look at some of the innovations we've come up with, we wouldn't have come up with them on our own as a bank. We were able to come up with them because we worked with some young, enterprising entrepreneurs who some of them had better technology than us, better innovative culture than us, but we brought scale. We brought a customer base, and we could then work on things together. So when people see something like a snap scan, that's a Standard Bank product. But how did it arise? Because there was an innovator that worked on it and it partnered us, and then suddenly we have a product that works out there. So there are many of these kinds of products that we could have together. The last and probably the most profound that's needed is to get all of the South African corporate environment, or according the continent, across the continent as well, to get this mindset of shared prosperity. I'm a big believer in shared prosperity, that business no longer should just be there about making profit and pleasing shareholders. That's an outdated mindset. That is important, but that's only part of the story. A fuller story is where you have shared prosperity, where you are building success and prosperity for a bigger pool of stakeholders, which is the community, broader society, your employees, your shareholders, and so on. That's the kind of mindset that we should have. We live in the most unequal country in the world, and that is not sustainable. We need to find innovative ways to help the rest of society to prosper. In turn, we would also be prospering as an organization or as broader corporate South Africa.
Thank you. Perhaps we can then, I will play the video again because it seemed that we had a bit of an audio problem. Some people, we couldn't hear that, but I'll conclude with that. But maybe I'll leave you, the two of you on the panel to give me a brief response to this. The question is, will the SMMEs or that sector be the catalyst to economic recovery? And I know I'm not giving you too much time, but just your thoughts on that. Maybe you can start with Martyn.
Hey, you know, it's I think not, I'm afraid. It's I wish it was different. You know, you have again, I always look to draw international comparisons. You have a country like an economy like Taiwan, which is 23 odd million people, I think it is now, thereabouts. Incredibly wealthy society, high tech, very innovative, but basically, I guess very few people on this call can ever name a Taiwanese company for me. And it's built on small business. More accurately at times, it's entrepreneurial driven, it's family business driven. And it doesn't create corporates. It hasn't got those big corporates like out of the UK, Germany, Japan, Korea, China, US. So what is the future for African countries, and make this broader, is how does and this is the intangible, and please read between the lines of what I'm going to say, it's quite a sweeping statement, is I believe beyond the expected, the deserved, and required direct interventions, support and mechanisms that a state should put in place to support small business. There's a second ingredient here. Let's call it culture. There needs to be a culture of entrepreneurship, which is the tone of entrepreneurship should be set by the state, where entrepreneurs should be recognized, not tenderpreneurs. They should be in jail. But real entrepreneurs, i.e. business builders, employment creators, value creators and taxpayers and contributors to a better society. Those companies need to be recognized and rewarded. But it's about how does the state, and this is where South Africa has failed, I'm afraid. It's not, I think there's no jury on this. I think it's very clear that the tone, the rhetoric from the state, the last generation has been very socialist orientated. It has not been entrepreneurially curated. And I think that intangible driver of growth, let's call it sort of entrepreneurial culture, needs to be instilled. And that, I think that's a reason why we have, even in South Africa, having the resources it does, has as Lincoln said, a unacceptably high structural unemployment, nudging 30% real, maybe more. It's socially, morally, politically, economically unacceptable and not sustainable. But maybe, just maybe, part of that has come about because the tone of culture of how entrepreneurs, or how do you build an entrepreneurial society? I think that culture needs to change. And that does not come about through socialist rhetoric and state intervention and state control and hollow ideological phrases like ideological or developmental state. I want to hear how we're supporting small micro businesses, because that's long-term, always the long-term future lead indicator of the success of long-term thinking societies. Thanks.
Thank you, Martyn. Lincoln?
So I think I would add by saying that there are many businesses that will not survive. Some of them because the fundamentals were not there in the first place. Some of them because the people running them were not entrepreneurs in the first place. And so those businesses are meeting the first economic resistance, and they will not survive. There's secondly a group of businesses that will not survive also because their relationship with their employees and their suppliers and their clients were not intact. Those businesses will not survive. What strangely may survive and may need to renewal are those entrepreneurs who, in the midst of the crisis, with or without government help, will see an opportunity to right in some wrongs, to meet some unmet needs. I think those people will find a way of creating businesses that are sustainable. And that's where Martyn's comments come in. It's if you created the right support for those businesses will be able to survive because there is a right business model, there is a right entrepreneur, they have a market, they are solving a need, and they are resilient. And that's what we're hoping we can get. So we are very hopeful, and we're hoping to find those gems of entrepreneurs that we can support through the cycle and through the difficulty. But what we shouldn't do as banks is to take depositors' monies and send them after bad businesses, because that's not sustainable. Once you do that, you are doing the same thing that SOEs have done. When you see SOEs collapse, SAA or any of these, watch when banks collapse. Then you have a crisis in your economy. So we have to be discerning as banks with your monies, with shareholders' monies, and invest in those businesses that have a huge propensity to survive and are resilient, and they've got a good business model through the cycle. So I'm very hopeful that those entrepreneurs will rise through with all the difficulties and help us with the recovery. But they have to digitize. They have to have a correct business model. They have to be closer to their clients and help their staff members in the process. There is hope.
Thank you for that. Okay, so thank you again for your time, gentlemen, in terms of this webinar. Perhaps Regent Business School is in that, looking in the same direction in terms of this enterprise development hub, in terms of supporting small and medium enterprises through a variety of services, to also look at people who might need to be reskilled or upskilled, given that they might be victims of the economic times that we find ourselves in terms of perhaps being retrenched or what. So I'm going to play the video again, but I want to say thank you to both you, Lincoln and Martyn, in terms of your time here this morning and for the insights you've shared with us. There's still quite a few questions, but if there's people need, I will talk to you all about that separately. This would be the first in a series of webinars that we are planning in terms of this theme or the topic in terms of entrepreneurial activity. We started with the effect of pandemics, and we hope to have a few more in that. So we look forward to some more conversations in that regard. Thank you again, gentlemen. And thank you to all the participants who spent the time with us this morning.